Hi, welcome. Today we are doing a presentation on spring, plants coming to life. So we're just gonna jump right in. Spring. So just to kind of summarize, recap, kind of the process of obviously plants are in bloom. Their growing season is generally spring to or through summer, and then they start to prepare for the winter months. Up here in Minnesota, of course, Minnesota is known for having the four distinctive seasons. Some other places don't really get the snow, and so their seasons can look different. But our seasons are very marked in that we do have a spring, a summer, a fall, and a winter. So this is very much so a presentation for Minnesota, for Minnesotans, just because it does look different in different places, and a lot of, plants do live all year round in other places. So this is for Minnesota, but um, they do drop their leaves in fall and they transfer their growth potential into the roots and the larger extremities of the plants, waiting out the colder, darker months. Um, Annuals drop their seeds, while perennials experience dormancy over the winter months. And they also do drop seeds as well, because perennials do oftentimes have seeds. Of course, some plants don't necessarily proliferate through seeds. They can spread through rhizomes, and other mechanisms. That is, of course, a different presentation. But the perennials will experience a dormancy over the winter months. Some trees produce sap, which is argued to insulate the trees from the cold. So a lot of them do look dead. A lot of them can kind of be snapped if because they dry out. Winter months are more dry, much less humid. Um, the, there's a bunch of weather things that we could talk about here, but maybe that's a different presentation. But um, some plants do maintain a little bit of their elasticity, flexibility. They don't snap in the winter. They kind of hold on to that life force, and of course that could be partially because they're bigger, but um, or other variables as well. But that's just something to bear in mind. This actually did prompt me because I believe that the growth potential does go into the roots during the winter months. I don't know if it's a full hibernation or if there is still development during the winter months, or how exactly that works. And so I am curious about that. That kind of sparked my thought processes in this when I was making this presentation, because obviously the leaves do all die off, and so you hear that the growth potential does kind of come back in to, protect the plant itself, and the sap acting as the protective insulator, kind of to keep the cold out a little more from, the living wood inside of the trunks. So it's a very interesting process, definitely worth more exploration. So, uh, but I was curious about that. Plants in winter. As the sun has more time in the sky overhead, come spring, the world warms and more earth is exposed for longer, allowing for more growth. This can mean fresh green buds, but also new shoots for branches, as well as leaves and flowers. So in the background, this picture is just a photo of buds that have burst, and there are leaves. So you may kind of take for granted that the leaves come out when winter has broken, but this is kind of photographically capturing that process, which is very, very interesting. Plants can be on their own cycles and bloom in their own time. Some peak in early spring, while others peak in midsummer or later. Um, and that is also something that you can be mindful of if you are planting like you're in your own gardens, in your own yards. Obviously, we want to make sure that we keep it sustainable for our wildlife. And so that might mean planning to have blooms in early spring, planning on having blooms, throughout every season just to ensure food for our wildlife. So, and that's fruits, berries, nuts, you know, grasses or, things that can maintain the wildlife in the ecosystem. So, um, but they can be on their own cycles, and you will see plants blooming at different times, and that is kind of nice. Some of the early bloomers that they may call them like Easter blooms, or are kind of tulips or daffodils, I believe, are also potentially early bloomers. Maybe don't quote me on that one, but there are a number of early bloomers that kind of come out, and of course, wild. Those are more cultivated, domestic, but um, there are also the wild um, plants that come out early. Even leaves can start with small buds, not just flowers. I apologize, the presentation has a spelling grammatical error. The above is a non-flowering shrub. So these are the small buds, just looking at the process on kind of a close-up. This is kind of a pretty standard for the flowering, or rather the non-flowering um, leaf buds. You kind of take for granted flower buds, but leaves also have buds. And so that's something that I hadn't really thought about before, but leaf buds. There you go. So much can change from week to week. This plant has blooms for just around 2 weeks of the year. And again, I did just take photos on a specified day. So um, there, I do realize this is not necessarily representative of capturing the first day that the blooms really came out, or the first day that the buds over here um, proliferated. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily happen like that. And that's why we watch the process, because sometimes it really does feel like it. Even I was being mindful of this, and it was like on a weekly, but all of a sudden, just it felt like out of nowhere, boom, everything's flowering. And I think that that's pretty cool, very, very interesting. So it was nice to be able to monitor and kind of take that into consideration, because it does have um, it's just cool. It's just cool to be able to um see what's going on there. This is just a short period after the flowers were in pretty much full bloom. And so, as 2 weeks of the year, and then almost instantly it felt like one strong wind and all of the petals were gone, all of the blooms were gone, um, just out of nowhere. So it's in peak, and then nothing. So I thought that that was a kind of a huge juxtaposition of having these gorgeous, beautiful flowers, and then these things, what's left behind. Let's see. So this is uh, another page here looking at the plants. This one is actually honeysuckle. So it's kind of looking at the progression here, because the flowers are not the end of the cycle. A lot of them do turn into berries. Um, and so this is looking at that process. The These are pretty much peak flowers on May 15th or May 18th, 2025. This is when I captured the flower die-off. And this is another thing. It's difficult to really ascertain specific dates because even within the plants, there is variation with when the peak is for, the flowers. A lot of them were blooming at this time, but you do have those early bloomers and you have the late bloomers as well. And you can see that in the berries as well. These ones are much more red, and these ones are green, and these ones are kind of orange, the in-between color. And this is kind of peak berry, which is July 13th, 2025. And so it's difficult to fully ascertain, and that's not a bad thing either, because these are these are going to be a good food source for, say, birds. And then these will, if these are eaten, these will come later, and then they will also be a good food source. So the first red berries here, they were mostly this green color. This green color, it's a little bit bigger of a photo here. Um, you got the red here, the orange here. So again, late bloomers, but this is around flower die-off. And in this picture, you can kind of see, it's a little difficult, and I do apologize for that. I'm trying to get all of these photos in, and trying to be practical too, which can be difficult, just because there was so much to see. But this is right below the flower, and it does have the beginning of these berries already in place. So even while you have the blooms going, the berries have already kind of started. And so even though this is kind of um, tracking the berry progression. That would be something that I could look at if I were to do this again, would be to track the sizes of the berries below the flowers before or during the die-off process. So this is tracking a few different plants going through. These ones are the flowering plants. So you can see these are the lilac buds. I apologize, some of them are missing just a few photos. Some of them, I think I started this one later, just realizing, hey, I should do that as well, that plant. And so that kind of just happened. I do believe that I'm missing 1 week in here, and I do want to apologize for that. A little more of the pink flowers, but you can kind of see just looking at all of them. I was glad that I did this, putting them kind of directly next to each other, because then you can kind of see where everything is at. For instance, you've got just the buds of the lilacs, and they start out this brown, they start to turn this green color, and then you've got the leaves. And it was interesting to me how many of the leaves don't start out that green color. A lot of them have the oranges like down, the yellows and the oranges like down here on this rose bush, on this plant as well, the lilacs. These ones, this is a sort of cherry tree that we had in our front yard. And these leaves actually start out as this brilliant, just gorgeous maroon red color before they do transition into the green. And you can kind of see that process in these photos as well. As these are red, red, and then you've got a few green in the background, more green with a little just tinge of red, and then green. But I thought that was kind of cool as well, just to see that color progression. Lilacs have the buds. Rosebush had very little going on for most of the first month compared to the other plants. But of course, this one also was cut down the season before. So you can see that it was just essentially low stumped in order to um, proliferate and promote fresh growth for the following year. And it did grow, and it still thrived. So that is, I believe that's called pollarding, and that is a tactic many will use to um, to actually. It's so low that maybe it wouldn't even be pollarding because pollarding is a little bit higher up on the trunk. So I think that that is actually um, a different term, and I want to apologize for that. But it's not coming to me right now, but I'm sure it will, and then I'll be like, ah, there we go. But we've got the greens. We've got these are flower blooms down here on the cherry tree. They are our first ones per these three, and that's coming uh, early May. We've got the blooms, the buds for the flowering. We've got buds here on the lilacs. Of course, these blooms are more, um, arguably more independent. They've got the longer stems to kind of, and that's perhaps evolution saying these flowers are going to be bigger, so they need more room, they need more space to bloom, so they're going to be farther away. Versus these are more clustered. And they're of course all, they're all spaced in their own separate fashion as well, but the lilacs are definitely more arguably clustered. You can see that here versus in here. And I do not have a picture of the full cherry tree, um, but it is pretty much covered. So you can see this is a bloom, this is going to be a bloom, those are going to be blooms, that's going to be a bloom. So there are a lot of flower blooms here in these May bloomers. We got the May blooms. And this is where I think that there was one more week that something must have gotten off in my research files. And I do want to apologize for that because I do believe I had other pictures that had more flower blossoms. Um, and so I think something did get off here because I think there was one more week of bloom here. Um, and then it turned to this. This is once the petals kind of blow away. It is gorgeous to watch that process happen. I was joking. It reminded me of Japanese animation just because I have seen that as a theme, where it's just watching the flower petals fall from the trees, and you'll get that in fall with fall autumnal leaves too, having them kind of artistically fall in the wind. But seeing the flower petals too is just stunning. It is a beautiful experience. It's so cool to be a part of that and to see that um, actually happen. Very majestic, something definitely to make note of if you are an experiential person. And it's a romantic one. But it's beautiful. So we've got that, and this is where you first start to see some growth in the rose bush, a little more growth, more green. And they all have kind of their unique structures. The rose bush does have thorns coming in, of course, with all this fresh green as well. And that's kind of a unique structure in and of itself to protect itself from predators. And then we have these beautiful, beautiful blooms, clusters, different, different type, arguably, from these ones. Next page. Getting more into late May, early June, and that's when we start to see some die off. We saw some die off earlier in late May for the cherry tree down here, and so it's just getting drier. Um, then we've got the lilacs kind of dying off, and it took a few weeks for them to really dry out through still like mid June, I'd say, or early to mid June. Um, then we are starting to see the buds for the roses. So those are starting to go just as the lilacs are dying. And then we've got the berries. Berries have started for this cherry tree, um, which is going to be a good food source for birds moving into winter. So we've already got berries starting up here. Then this is some of the I do have many more photos um in a different presentation, and so I did try to kind of mix them up on this presentation. And so this one is definitely the wide shot, the wide angle, just because there wasn't a lot of differentiation from week to week, and so I thought that this would be a good one to kind of just put in. This is the scope of the plant, the entire plant this week. If you do want to see more photos for each week, I do have a number for many of the weeks with just featuring different elements from each week. But I tried to consolidate it and make it just a little bit nicer for this particular presentation. We got the roses coming in. We had the blooms here. Now they're coming in. This is the seeding mechanism for the lilacs. And that is, of course, a unique type of seeding mechanism that you might not see. Definitely different from the berries, which we have down here. We've got these roses, the roses. Then this doesn't really change too much for the rest of the observation period. You just get the green seed pouches with the dead petals surrounding. So I kind of swapped to the leaves as the focus from there. You can kind of see July is starting to get a little sun spotted, a little more mature in the leaf versus the vibrant green or the lighter green of the fresh leaves, and then they kind of turn a little bit darker with age. Um, um, Much of the time. And then just the tree again. You will notice though, even though the lilacs have died, they're consistently putting on new growth, fresh buds. These presumably are going to be extending either more leaves or more segments for branching off of this particular branch. And so I thought that that was interesting to actually catch that process in late July. So that, and some of them had a little bit of a blurb right here too, a little spike right there, in between the two buds that are coming in. So I thought that that was interesting, and I was glad to have been able to have captured that just to see the consistent, continued new growth throughout the season. The roses started dying off 7/13. And then after they lost their petals, this is kind of what they looked like. And this is the far away at the end of July. Of course, again, they do not all, the roses don't all bloom at the same time. So you can still see there are a few blooms here, even though much of the rest of the bush has gone to seed, um, has died off. So a few blooms here, maybe some over here, but most of it is green. And moving on, we got more of these cherry berries, late getting into later summer, starting into fall. And we've got doom, doom, doom. We have little holes in these berries. I did actually kind of dig into one of them, or actually maybe even a few of them, and I believe those are bugs that have injected or gotten into there. And so that's something most all of the berries were penetrated in some fashion. So I thought that that was interesting. I do need to do more research into what exactly that was, but that is also something that was intriguing because you can see the hole there. You can see I think that's just the bottom of the berry here, but there's a hole here, bottom of the berry, a hole. So a lot of them did have a bug life, and they were made use of by some other creature, but they do all have different seeding mechanisms. I believe I'm not that familiar with roses actually, as it turns out. And so I was curious, and this is not, there are different varieties of roses. This is a rose bush, not your standard Valentine's Day rose, of course. Definitely a different petal structure. But I'm thinking that these are holding the seeds. And this obviously berries are have the seeds in there. The pits of the berries are the seeds. And then the lilacs, we had the seeds on the other page, but they do all have different seeding mechanisms that will release at different times and with, different release methods. And that I believe I did kind of talk about in a different presentation. These are two non-flowering plants kind of tracked during the season. Um, and I do apologize. I do not know the species of either of these. Um, so I just labeled them Green Bush 1, Green Bush 2. This one had in early April, just had the buds coming out. And this one, I will also apologize. It was a little complex because I think that it has about three different plants all kind of interwoven into one area, and then it also had a grapevine growing. So a lot of my photos kind of tried to tackle both of the trees or both of the bushes that were kind of intertwined, and then I did also um, I I believe I got a photo of the grapevine, but but it's kind of messy, it's kind of sloppy, and so um, so I don't know what it is, and I try to just keep this as representative as I could with the photos that I had. So these buds are farther along. You can kind of see the tips of the leaves already coming out. They're still in the bud sheath down pretty far though. And you can see that up close here as well. You got the tips coming out. These ones look a little more ragged, maybe perhaps more plentiful. Whereas this does not look as, it looks much neater coming out of the bud. Um, yeah, these are already definitely emerging. You can see the differentiated leaves, and then you have that up here as well. And you can just see them kind of proliferate. And you got just a small amount here coming out, and it's much more here, and then much more, and then we've got larger here, larger here, larger here. 511 or 513. I did actually take a series of photos here, and it looks like this one's just missing because I did actually trim the bushes on this day. Just because that some of them were getting a little unkempt, and I thought it would be a good experience to do a little more yard work and things like that. I believe my mother also did trim down some of the bushes throughout the summer. And so I do recognize that the photos may not be as representative because I did trim them down, like looking at the size and growth. And again, I do actually have photos of the entire plant throughout the entire process. But I just thought that having the up close detailed photos might be more interesting for this particular presentation. So I didn't want to just have the wide shots that we have here on 518 for Greenbush number 1. I do have those throughout the entirety for all of the plants, but again, I thought that this would probably be more interesting looking at the minutia, the up close here. But these ones were a little bit tougher because they are non-flowering, and so a lot of it was just green throughout. Of course, that did give us the opportunity to check out, the nuances of the greens, some diseases, some uh, perhaps wildlife, bacterium, bugs. Um, I believe would be termed a gall. Looks like it was used and perhaps then abandoned. I'm not sure, or if that is a disease there. But these do look to be a disease, and some mold happened on this leaf. So that's something that you can look for as well. This shows, I thought this was a good angle, a good shot because it shows the fresh life again later in the season. You're still pulling that growth potential in from the nutrients from the earth and the sunshine, and it's still going full throttle. So even though it was trimmed down 511, 513, you still have the boost here of all these that are kind of up past the line of the bush. Those were all trimmed down, and whoop, they came right back. So, and you can see that here, it's more proliferated here again of just more growth throughout the season. So, and then this was also trimmed back, and we've got the larger kind of trees just branching right back out. So we got those still just poking out, more of them out on this plant now. Some of it did start to kind of turn yellow, a lot of these. Um, and that I don't know if that is like leaning into fall a little bit. I think this year it might be beneficial to start tracking more of the fall changes, which I did not do, and I definitely could have. Um, but that's definitely a project worth pursuing. But they did start to turn yellow, a lot of them on this plant here, and some of this brown speckling, and that could also be disease as well. But when the bushes were trimmed, the branches did fill up again with new growth, was kind of the takeaway. Looking at different diseases as well was something to look at, and that was cool as well. These are two conifers that were in the yard also that I kind of photographed consistently. This is a relative of a cedar, juniper. This is a bush, so it's not ground hugging, and it does not spread in the way that some of the more like crawling junipers do. So it doesn't. We've had this one around for a very long time. It doesn't get tall, but it is in the cedar family. And so these ones did not. The growth was not as marked, kind of like the green. It was tougher to tell the growth cycle because after you got all the green leaves on there, that was kind of it was kind of just okay, now it's green, and then that's kind of it, then it'll turn for the fall. These ones, of course, um, are different. So it was tougher to see the actual growth happening. You had to zoom in close. You can kind of see the ends have the little um, yellow buds. That is how they expand. These ones are very segmented, and so they'll put on little segments of green as they grow. Started out yellow, 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 and then they started turning green, and then that's late or mid to late May that they were green. And you could tell that that is fresh growth, new growth here on the ends of the cedar relative here. This is a pine relative here, and it was kind of a sucker. It wasn't meant to be in this particular array of plants. So you can tell that it is immature, it is young, and so it's not as established. The needles are not established, in the way that you might normally see them. So this was a unique experience, I think, for me on this one to see this type of structure. I wonder um, what it would look like as a mature plant because it was a sucker. I do think that it was taken out of the front rocks, fortunately or otherwise, where it was not supposed to be. Maybe um, but it started out kind of a darker color and then it kind of transitioned into more vibrant with the changing of the season, more into the growing season. Um, Again, it's not as marked. It did get taller, which was kind of cool to see babies growing up. But you can even see this is a much more vibrant green from this first stark, very kind of dark gray green versus more of a vibrant green, sage green to uh, lemon green. Um, but it would progress. You can kind of see this needle structure. And I would like to watch this just to see how, like, what actually happens. Because this one was also segmented. You can see here um, some fresh growth on the tips here. A slightly different color, more yellow. And that kind of connotes that it is new. It doesn't have the same coloring as the rest of it. So definitely segmented. And this is not a traditional needle. And so the way that this is growing, maybe I am wrong that it is more of a pine relative. I was looking at the up and down of it, and perhaps this is more of a cedar relative, just looking at it, but it just looks pokier. And I will need to do a little more research on this one. I'd like to see it more like mature, um, because I could be wrong on this differentiation here, but because it is immature and I'm not familiar with this plant, but be interesting to see how it develops, what kind of needles, or if it is just going to continue with this type of structure. Um, I guess it's something that I kind of took for granted. I was presuming it would develop more needles, needle-esque type, and that would be something to observe. But we got fresh growth on the ends. It looks like it's more yellow kind of again. But that could mean that it's just in need of more of that sunshine to kind of get that green filled up also. Um, fresh growth, fresh growth. So just looking at those. Again, it was difficult to see a lot of change with these, slow growth, but you can definitely see in the close-ups that fresh growth is happening. They are getting bigger. There is a whole another branch coming off of this, which I did get photos of, but I did want to keep this presentation a little more clear cut, a little more concise, so I didn't add them. But and again, these are evergreens, meaning that they're green no matter the season. They can still show fresh growth in the warmer months, but they are always green, and so that is something to kind of bear in mind. Throughout the growing season, you will see different pests, different diseases, mildews, and this is kind of a compilation of different, galls here, different things that you can check out and see on the different leaves, different leaf structures. Um, Definitely unique, definitely a different presentation. I think that um, we did touch on some of those. I know there was a presentation done on galls already, but definitely worth looking at. Here are a few other plants that were also observed. These ones I had no clue of the name of, and again, you can go to you can do a Google image search, and you can use your identification apps, and they can get you names, and a lot of names they go by different things in different places too. And so I just thought I'd keep it simple, and say pink flowered bush, white flowered bush, um, and then we have another cherry tree in the back, a different type of cherry. But this one was actually mostly dead for much of this season. And so that I wonder if I do have a full photo, but see buds, no buds, no buds, some coloring change here. And then you see comparable, the buds, the green kind of coming out. This one does have slightly different because it looks like the sheaths are very much green versus some of the other ones were more yellow. And then they just kind of look like they're turning into the leaves as well. More green, more green. And then you've got the different flowering structures. Again, these ones are clustered. And these ones have a little more space in between them. There is still some clustering here if you look at this branch, but it's much, much different from these other ones here. Um, and then this, more leaves than anything, just because most of it was dead, and there were actually very few blooms, which we saw right here. I think it's just in poor health. I think I did look it up and I'm wondering if it hit its life cycle. I think some trees are only meant to live for about 30 years. Some can make it for 100, but I think this one is kind of coming near the end of its life cycle. It did have some greens, but not definitely not as much, and the blooms were few and far between. Some flowers you can see again. The die-off, there were a lot of late blooms on this. Some die-off here, even in late June. Some die-off here in July. You're still seeing blooms through late July, though, and then the die-off. And I think there were even still blooms here as well. But you get to see this. No sign of the white flowers. That again were just around for a few weeks, and this one was the plant that we touched on earlier. Um, just a few weeks of blooms, which again I thought was very interesting. And that's something to bear in mind with our floral industry. Having those roses available year round and the daisies and the sunflowers available for sale. That's something, if they do only bloom for 2 weeks, that's pretty amazing. That's something that must be planned exceptionally. So, with that, I am going to wrap up. Are there any questions?